Time to draft, starting with the first pack of Gatecrash, and the rares and uncommons aren't too exciting, all playable but not something you want to first pick. However, we have Mugging and Cloudfin Raptor, probably the best commons in their respective colors, although I think that Cloudfin Raptor is a little bit overrated, whereas Mugging is a card that I like to have the first one off, but it's not that you're looking to draft a deck with like 3 Muggings over anything else. Especially compared to very effective 2-drops like Wojak Halberdiers. It's kind of the card that you actually want in your Boros decks rather than a lot of Muggings. However, Mugging is the more versatile option. It's also playable in Gruul. And I think the first Mugging should always be picked over the 2-drops, but then you can easily change that afterwards. This pack has a rare missing, so we don't get that much information from that. The best commons are Kingpin's Pet, Croconora, Mugging, and Smite. Now, Smite is weaker than Kingpin's Pet, so it's really between these 3 commons here. Balustrade Spy and Rust Scarab don't really compete, I think, in the respective power level. I really like Croconora, but now that we have picked 1 Mugging already, and I just said that you don't actually want multiples of, it would be a nice way to solidify being in red, and then we can hopefully still go into either Gruul or Boros. But Muggings also are a card that are potentially splashable. I think it's better to take the Mugging here than the Kingpin's Pet. Next up, we see that there is an Orzhov Charm, so this is the second good Orzhov card that we see after the Pet. There's also Croconora, which I think is really, really good in all green decks. I think it's an underrated common. Madcap Skills I don't like all that much, especially after starting with 2 Muggings. Then there's Ivolane Denizen and Warmind Infantry. Both are fine. Warmind Infantry is actually always good when you play it, but the question is how to proceed here. We could just stay on color, pick Warmind Infantry, which is weaker than Croconora. Croconora to go into some kind of Gruul build, or just looking at the signals, take the Orzhov Charm and maybe work out something splashing the Muggings or going into a 3-color removal deck, maybe. This pack is difficult. I'm not too sure how to read the signals. I think that Croconora is probably the best bet, giving us a nice, powerful card, but yeah, not sticking to red cards only. Looks like both white and green are reasonably open. Urbis Protector, not the card that all the white decks want, but still quite powerful compared to the other common and uncommon 6-drops in the format. There's Boros Guildgate, but Gruul Charm is by far the most powerful card in this pack, if you ask me, and I'm very happy to have the Croconora, and hopefully we can make some kind of Gruul deck happen from here on. This pack has Miming Slime. In theory, that's supposed to be a good Gruul card because of Blood Rush. I found that it somehow doesn't happen all that often, that you have the blowout turn of Blood Rushing plus a large Miming Slime, and I don't really like to play it all that much anymore. The card I like more is Burst of Strength, but our deck is severely lacking in creatures right now, so this makes Burst of Strength and Miming Slime rather weak. There also aren't really any reasonable alternatives. We can't really pick Basilica Guards. We want our left neighbor to be an Orzhov, and Towering Thunderfist just doesn't compete with what we have so far. I'm going to pick Burst of Strength because I really want one in all my green decks, and I think that Miming Slime, as I said, isn't all that great. If our deck comes together really well with a lot of Blood Rush cards, then we are already in a pretty good position, and we don't need the card that's good if things are going our way, but we want the cards that can actually get us to that point. It's a pretty late Soul Ransom, also multiple Smites going around, so that's something that the Gruul deck has to be very rare of. But we're getting a late gift here, 6th pick, Zertar Swine, fits perfectly into what we're trying to do. And things are looking great. Oozflag's not a card I'm really fond of. Even in the best Simic decks, it often doesn't do enough. Burst of Strength, you all know, is one of my favorite cards. But here we are getting a 7th pick Disciple of the Old Ways, and if you're actually in Gruul, this is one of the best common 2-drops you can pick up. Overall, quite a powerful pack. If you look at these commons all being very reasonable inclusions in their respective decks. And that's not a Gruul pack, that's for sure. Executioner's Swing, Martial Glory, Psychic Strike, all quite okay, some better than others. The question is what we don't want to play against and what we want to signal to our left. I think we probably want the Orzhov player to our left to get the Executioner's Swing. We should have a pretty good matchup against Orzhov with our muggings, and we just have to be scared of Smite, and Executioner's Swing is actually not that big of a deal. I think I'm going to take out Martial Glory because it's also a red card, so I want to make sure that people to our left aren't in my colors. This is a point where I'm going to pick up Tin Street Market, the main reason being the signaling, but if we happen to end up in a more late game oriented Gruul deck with Greenside Watchers and maybe some Guild Gates, then I actually like Tin Street Market as a way to make sure that the late game is fine. Here there's Millennial Gargoyle. I try never to play this card. I think it's just too far below the curve to warrant an inclusion. We also have Gruul Charm, so maybe we don't even want to play our own flyers. I think that Verdant Haven is a nice pickup here. Similarly to the Tin Street Market, it's something that we might want to combine with Greenside Watcher. And here there's just some cards that might make our sideboard, but which I will hide for now. We can keep in mind that we have a Martial Glory, but currently we aren't looking to splash anything, so the Verdant Haven most likely won't make our deck either. Here we go with pack 2, and what a pack it is. We have 3 Orzhov cards right here, and then a Syndic of Tithes as well. Deathcult Rogues, Gutter Skulk, all good in black decks. And for us, there really isn't much here. There's a Bomber Core, a Prophetic Prism, and if we want to branch out into another color, we could think about splashing Urban Evolution. A card like Wildwood Rebirth is fine in Gruul, always playable, and sometimes quite nice with the late game cards, but it's not the card that I want to first pick. I'm not the biggest fan of Urban Evolution. I think that the tempo loss is actually not worth the 3 cards most of the time. You need a very specific deck to make Urban Evolution good. If you get that, it can be really good, and we have the potential with cards like Verdant Haven, but I didn't really see that in this draft, so I'm going to go with a very conservative Bomber Core here that relies on us getting a lot more creatures, but that's where we want to be going anyway, so I'm reinforcing the plan, my A plan here, and hopefully we will see some better Gruul cards from the left. I mean, we did pass all the Orzhov cards, so I'm still feeling pretty good, even though these packs aren't looking amazing. Here we have Scorchwalker, Armor Transport, and Gruul Keyrune. Now, Gruul Keyrune isn't great because it can be really slow, but we have 2 muggings and 2 5-drops already, and the Trample and Blood Rush are really synergistic. So I think taking the Uncome here is better than taking a mediocre common like Scorchwalker or Armor Transport. In the best case, we can wheel one of them, and the Gruul Keyrune could prove to be quite good in our deck. Hey, that's a Scark Goliath. Not the cheapest card around, but something that we can definitely incorporate in this deck, and which makes me happy that we have the Keyrune and maybe we will be on the lookout for some Greenside Watchers to combine with the Verdant Havens, because that actually gives you a lot of acceleration to get the Goliath going. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of this card because I like to draft really low curve decks, but if there is one deck in the format that can really go large, it's Gruul, in my opinion, in my experience. Here there's a Biomass mutation. Now, that looks pretty amazing, but oftentimes the effect is just not worth it. And we are looking to play very expensive big creatures already, so turning them into XX creatures is not what this deck is trying to do. It looks like we're getting cut here. I haven't seen a lot of good cards for us so far, which is kind of sad. The best card in this pack is probably Cartel Aristocrat, and after that the power level drops down significantly. With us at such a low creature count, we are probably forced to take the Millennial Gargoyle here. Not happy about it, but I'm also, except for the Aristocrat, I'm not passing much. And the Aristocrat still being in the pack probably means that our left neighbor isn't in Orzhov, so something went wrong with either our signaling or the way our neighbor's draft developed. We did pass Kingpin's Pet and Orzhov Charm, and then some Smites. There was a lot of Orzhov cards going around, but of course there are a lot of reasons why our neighbor might not be in Orzhov after all, and that most of the time that has to do with the first pick, of course. Now we got our first Greenside Watcher, which is a good start, and here we do have another one, but we are at pick 20 and we don't have a single guild gate yet, so I don't want to overvaluate the Watchers at this stage. They can be great, but they can also be the worst 2-drop in your deck. Although we do have a Bombo Core already, so there's some tough competition for worst 2-drop. The decision here is whether to take the Watcher or Ivy Lane Denizen, and Denizen is a card that has grown on me quite a bit. It doesn't look very powerful, 4 mana 2/3, but 3 toughness stops a lot of the 2 and 3 drops in this format, and the +1/+1 counter is quite relevant. I think I'm going to diversify my deck a little bit here. This pack has some more cards for us to consider. Our deck isn't aggressive enough for Foundry Street Denizen, so it's between Wildwood Rebirth, Tin Street Market, and Ruination Worm. And we already have a Market, which we don't really know if we will play. So I think the decision is between Rebirth and Ruination Worm. And I actually like the first Worm better than the first Rebirth, simply because the Worm is guaranteed to do something. Whereas the Rebirth, we don't actually have all that many amazing targets, except for the Swine and of course the Goliath, but at this stage the game should be almost over. Another great Dimir pack, Keymaster Rogue Balustrades by Bane Alley Broker, all very, very good, and we probably don't want to play against Bane Alley Broker because we are too slow to punish our opponent for going for a late game 0-3. Keymaster Rogue, not a big problem, we have 2 muggings already. So I think we hate draft the Bane Alley Broker, even though Balustrade Spy is also quite potent. This is the pack we started with. Wildwood Rebirth table, other than that, well, all the cards that we wouldn't be able to play anyway. So let's take the Rebirth, we might play it. And at least the Scorchwalker Wield, so that's something. This isn't going to make any of our decks. I suppose we can take the Keyrune here. Not a big deal, but who knows. Furious Resistance is a card I actually like, especially in the Gruul mirror, but hopefully we won't be forced to run it. Things aren't looking amazing, but we still have cards to play and some ways to win. So even though our deck looks a bit clunky and underpowered, we have some early game, we have Gruul Charm and the Fatties to win. So I think if the next pack delivers some sweet Gruul cards, and in theory it should because we did get Gruul signals in the first pack, then we should actually be fine. Boros Reckoner is a sweet rare to open. We are only in Gruul rather than Boros, but like I said, what this deck is missing currently is power level, and Boros Reckoner certainly delivers on that. And also, there isn't really much here that compares to Boros Reckoner, even remotely. Next up, we have another interesting pack. Burning Tree Emissary can be very, very good, but sometimes it's also just very mediocre. So it's a difficult card to evaluate because it almost always depends very heavily on what you're trying to do currently. But overall, I quite like it simply because of the starts of, let's say, Burning Tree Emissary into Disciple. There's Madcap skills, which this isn't the deck for. Also Gruul Guildgate and Greenside Watcher, which both would be fine cards to have. We do have one Greenside Watcher, so we would have to prioritize getting at least one Guildgate before going into that direction. But overall, I think that the Emissary is just sufficiently more powerful, and then we can still wheel whatever card we can get out of this pack later. Orzhov Charm and Gruul Charm, both in the pack, and definitely the strongest cards here. For us, it's of course the Charm in our guild. Pretty easy choice over not much else. And here we are probably going to end up picking Skinbrand Goblin as another cheap 2-drop, also a Blood Rush card, and sometimes giving your creature a very minor bonus for a low amount of mana is actually better than giving them a huge bonus, because a lot of the blocks or a lot of the combat matchups are just so close that something like a small bonus is enough and you don't actually need to give +5/+4. I'm going to go with Skinbrand Goblin here. I think it's pretty clear that it's better in this deck than another expensive card. That's a late gift, Gorkland Rampager, probably the best uncommon in Gruul. Yeah, and it might be one of the best uncommons in this set overall. If you've seen what this card does, or if you have had to play against it, even if you know your opponent has it, you can almost never do much about it. Now, this card decides games when Blood Rush, but I think it isn't hard cast enough. Also, just having a 4/4 Trampler for 4 is probably one of the best cost to power ratios that you can get in the format. Here, it's basically Pit Fight or Gruul Guildgate, and we aren't really looking to go into the Greenside Watcher, Verdant Haven direction anymore. Tin Street Market, we probably won't have to play now that our playable count has grown. Also, Pit Fight and Boros Reckoner are truly amazing when combined. So that, and the fact that we have at least some creatures that can make Pit Fight a straight up instant removal spell, make this pick, I wouldn't say easy, but it's not really close. So here once again we will have to pass a Guildgate, and the pick here has to be Skark Guildmage. And this pack has made me quite happy, showing that we didn't end up in the wrong guild after all. It looks like there aren't many Gruul drafters at this table. We might be the only one, and I'm very happy to have the Guildmage to get some additional power. And the great thing about the Guildmage is that it does come down on turn 2. It does start threatening the opponent as early as turn 4. But if you draw it in the late game, it also compares very favorably to those expensive cards over here. So Skark Guildmage just a very good card. Here I like Scapland Charger better than Greenside Watcher. We have a lot of exchangeable 2-drops right now, so Greenside Watcher would just be another one of these, but Charger gives us an efficient combat trick and a reasonable sized creature. Ripscale Predator is often better than Ruination Worm. Probably doesn't end up in our deck, most likely, but who knows. And the foil Guildgate actually wheeled, which is nice because we do have the Watcher and we do have Boros Reckoner. And every Guildgate does make it easier to cast the Reckoner. The color mana distribution of this deck is going to be interesting. From a perspective of consistency, we just want 8 forests and 8 swamps to maximize our chances to have all the available mana. For the Reckoner, we would love to have an additional red source, of course, but yeah, it's just not going to happen all that often that we can cast him on turn 3, but that doesn't change significantly if we skew our mana base, and it does increase the risk of mulligans. We might be forced to just run the Keyrune and the Haven to actually be able to skip our 3-drop slot in a way, because we don't have anything else to do at this stage. I'm going to take another market. You've seen me draft Razor Tip Whip a lot as well, but I think it's not that great in this kind of deck, which has ways to deal massive amounts of damage to our opponent. We aren't relying on smaller creatures to get our opponent down to 5, and then the Rip does the rest. This isn't all that amazing. I don't think we need Frenzied Tilling, so Syndicate Enforcer. Just a clear hate draft here. Here we do have a decision. We could pick a second Ruination Worm, but we can also hate draft Corpse Blockade, and Corpse Blockade is very good against us, so I'm going to take it out. It's unlikely that we are playing both of these 6-drops, so picking up a third one wouldn't really add any utility to our deck. Although I could see a build of this deck that incorporates quite a lot of the expensive cards, but we'll have to see about that. Time to build this deck, and hopefully, well, let's keep the Guildgate out for now so that we can see what we are actually working with. Now, we certainly aren't lacking playables. More than enough cards to play, of course. I just added all of them, so there is definitely some cards that we never want in our decks. We are also going to have to reduce the spell count significantly, because it's just not possible to play that many spells, of course. Now, the most important decision is going to be how to go about the expensive cards and the package of Verdant Haven and Gruul Keyrune, which would mean that we are playing more mana sources, which means that we need more cards that have an impact, which would be the more expensive cards. And then we have to make sure that our creatures and our spells support a late game strategy rather than a more aggressive early game strategy. So, and that's something, of course, you decide while drafting and while building your deck, but it's also sometimes just in the cards. You can't just force a deck into a certain direction. You have to see what you're working with. And from looking at this deck, we have a lot of power, but we do need time for the power to get online, and it's not reasonable to think that we will be able to overwhelm any opponent in the early game. That's just not what our cards are meant to do. So with that said, I'm looking to build a slow Gruul deck that's trying to just stay alive and go over the top of people. And Gruul Charm is going to help defending against flyers and dealing the killing blow. So I like these. We won't need the tower defense because we do have 2 Gruul Charms, which I think are better. So this is an easy cut in the spells department. And if we want to be more controlling and want to play Verdant Haven and Gruul Keyrune, then we probably have to cut Wildwood Rebirth simply for space, and we might have to get rid of Burst of Strength as well, which is nice on defense, but it's much better on offense when you can entice a block where people are playing around Blood Rush or accepting that you might have a Blood Rush card, but then you blow them out with Burst of Strength, which generates a lot of tempo as a result. So that's something to consider, and also how to go about the Tin Street markets, which are certainly playable, but not amazing in this deck. However, they will make sure that we don't flood out in the later stages of the game, which is something that can easily happen when you're playing a lot of mana sources and, well, additional non-land mana sources. So looking at the creatures, I think Bombarcore is just too weak in this deck, but I like all the other 2-drops. So that would be the 2-drop to cut. In the 4-drop slot, we do have quite a lot of cards, even though these act as spells sometimes. But looking at our overall deck, Scorchwalker most likely will just come down as a 5/1. I don't like Millennial Gargoyle, like I said. I just don't think it's very good. And I think that Swine and Goliath are 2 of the backbones of this deck. And I kind of like the 6-drops as well. Maybe playing 2 of them is excessive, but it's pretty clear that we should have at least 1 of them in our deck, because they are just very fitting. So if we cut these, then we are down to 15 creatures, so we probably wouldn't want to go down any further, simply because of the numbers. So if we try this, then we are down to 25 cards, and we do want 17 lands in this deck. Even though that gives us 19 mana sources, we could just play 1 Tin Street Market to somehow counteract the danger of flooding. And one way to do that would be to cut Burst of Strength and Tin Street Market, and then go for a really control-ish late game deck, which I think looks like a good idea. At least it does give us a nice looking curve, which I think is very important in this format, and I'm quite fond of the 6-drops in this deck. Now that I look at it, it pains me to cut a card like Burst of Strength, but honestly, it probably wouldn't be the best in this deck. So sacrifices have to be made. I think we should run this deck with an even color distribution. I already talked about this deck wanting to have some more red sources, but now that we have Verdant Haven, Gruul Kirun, and the Greenside Watcher, casting Boros Reckoner hopefully won't be too tough. And I just don't want to stare at opening hands with only forests or only mountains, and then we can't cast the green cards. That I think the deck is good enough to support an even mana base without having to risk too much for a single card, even though that card is very, very powerful, don't get me wrong. Okay, I like how this is looking. A little less aggressive than what I like to draft in this format, but as long as we can get a 2-drop and stay in the game from turn 2 on, then our late game should hopefully pull it out. See you soon.